few days back, Tom Connors of Midnight's Edge fame retweeted an article from Forbes, which up until then had flown under most people's radar. The article is titled, "The Backlash to The Last Jedi Shows That Star Wars Fans Actually Liked Luke Skywalker." At first, I wondered why Tom would retweet a more than 2-year-old article, because surely, an article such as this should have been put out in the immediate aftermath of The Last Jedi's initial release. As it turned out though, it was actually published this month, on May 5th of 2020, 2.5 years after The Last Jedi was dropped in theaters. That means that up until this point in time, the article's author, Scott Mendelson, seems to have suffered from the delusion that Luke Skywalker wasn't popular. And as we shall see, that's not the worst of this, because he wrote the article for his peers in the industry that still haven't figured this out. It's easy for us to point and laugh at Forbes for only now catching up to a fact that should have been blatantly obvious the whole time, but I won't do too much of that. Instead, I will begin this editorial by going through the recent discoveries about Luke Skywalker's popularity, before getting into the more important topic of why there was a need for this article in the first place. To this end, I will go through the concepts of cognitive dissonance and the dangers of echo chambers. The article begins by referencing Sam Witwer, the voice actor behind Darth Maul, who, as Forbes put it, has joined the chorus of Star Wars folks taking issue with The Last Jedi, specifically the whole hermit Luke Skywalker thing. This is significant. Forbes and the industry at large have a tendency to consider the movie-going audience as filthy, unwashed masses whose protests can be dismissed, but Witwer is one of them. And he just joined Mark Hamill, who is also one of them, and a handful of others, in criticizing a movie and a filmmaker the rest of the industry hailed as the best thing since sliced bread. Such breaking of ranks can only be ignored for so long. Industry incumbents speaking out may provoke some very painful introspection and rethinking of assumptions regarded as facts. Forbes references the following statement from Witwer. Last Jedi, to me, felt like a movie made by a guy who hadn't quite done his homework. I think Rian Johnson's a talented guy, but Bruce Lee didn't develop Jeet Kune Do without learning Kung Fu first. You can't reinvent Star Wars without knowing Star Wars first, and he didn't. For me, make a compelling argument for why Luke didn't go and help his sister. This is just my opinion, guys. There were a lot of things in The Last Jedi I found compelling in a Rian Johnson filmmaker point of view. They just didn't fit into Star Wars. I don't think he did his Star Wars homework. The themes, what it's about, what the characters are about. But as a standalone film, if I don't know what the Jedi are, or who Luke is, or what he represents, I think there's some compelling things in there. If that's meaningful to you, that's awesome. This is evidently dynamite, because Scott Mendelson makes a point of emphasizing that he obviously disagrees with Witwer's opinion. Can't have any of Mendelson's peers in the industry think he has suddenly turned on The Last Jedi and everything it represents, now can we? Still, Mendelson finds the sheer number of people who take issue with the portrayal of Luke Skywalker as a bitter defeatist to be interesting. He quickly absolves Hollywood of any blame though, as he notes that conventional wisdom suggests that audiences don't like straight-arrow Boy Scouts, and Luke Skywalker would be one of those. Speaking on behalf of the audience, or rather, Hollywood's view of the implied pleb that make up the audience, Mendelson states, "They prefer Han Solo to Luke Skywalker, Jack Sparrow to Will Turner, and Batman to Superman. Luke Skywalker and Superman are often used as templates for the kind of Dudley Do-Right hero filmmakers claim to avoid because audiences allegedly can't relate to them. However, he then suggests that this may no longer be true, and goes on to cite some examples of Han Solo-like characters that failed with audiences, like Ryan Reynolds' Green Lantern, and a Luke Skywalker-like character that actually won audiences over, Chris Evans' Captain America, who the conventional Hollywood wisdom was that audiences shouldn't respond to. Yet somehow they did. Go figure. As many of you know, I'm not really a Star Wars fan. I didn't grow up with it, and by the time I did see it, I was too old to be wowed by it or connect with it. Yet even I recognize that while Han Solo is the cool character you wanted to be, Luke Skywalker was the character you actually recognized yourself in. He was the one you emphasized with, and the one you projected yourself into. In actual reality, most people aren't like Han Solo, they're like Luke Skywalker. That's why he's the point of view character. Han Solo was there, but Luke Skywalker was the one that audiences followed through his journey a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. In Disney's sequel trilogy, they disrespectfully cast aside all the legacy characters that had been along for that journey last time around. There was no respectful change of guard or passing of the torch, just a disrespectful dismissal, and none got that worse than Luke Skywalker. The closest representation you have on screen of the movie-going audience, and generations upon generations of Star Wars fans. When Luke Skywalker was disrespected and cast aside, so were they. Even so, Mendelson emphasizes that Lucasfilm and Rian Johnson did nothing wrong with The Last Jedi, nothing at all. The article reads, "That's not to say that Rian Johnson and friends were wrong to turn Luke Skywalker into a defeatist hermit during The Last Jedi. First, J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens teased at Luke's tragic post-Return of the Jedi backstory and stranded him on a deserted island. Side note, not in the article. It was Kathleen Kennedy who demanded this, because the scripting process revealed that Luke Skywalker would upstage anyone if he actually was in The Force Awakens. So yeah, Lucasfilm knew how important he was. Anyway, back to the article. Second, to the extent that Mark Hamill's Luke was presented as less than idealized in that Star Wars story. His characterization was mostly consistent with his original trilogy behavior. That's a stretch if I ever saw one. His final pacifistic redemptive act was one for the Jedi record books, and the film had comparatively conventional heroes in Rey, Leia, Finn, and Rose. Luke wasn't initially the hero because it wasn't his story, but rather Rey and Kylo's, which of course was part of what Last Jedi was all about. Mendelson then goes on to dismiss the backlash as relative. It wasn't that bad. The movie still got rave reviews, a cinema score rating of A, and it grossed $1.3 billion worldwide. Although he very conveniently ignores that is down $700 million from the previous movie. The backlash only came later, and he was one of the critics praising it. But look at him now, having to excuse himself for pointing out that maybe, just maybe, everything wasn't as perfect as everyone has been telling themselves it was. This is what we call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is a term from the field of psychology, coined by Leon Festinger in 1957. It describes a mentally stressful condition caused by psychological inconsistency. An example of this is when strongly held beliefs or convictions are challenged by new information. Information which suggests that the strongly held beliefs and convictions, whatever they may be, could be wrong. The widely accepted theory goes that in such circumstances, one will try to reduce the mental anguish brought on by cognitive dissonance through a variety of means. The first line of defense is of course to ignore the new information, dismiss it in its entirety, and depending on your environment, launch ad hominem attacks against those who dared challenge your convictions by presenting you with such obviously false new information. But if this new information won't go away, if there is ever more and more of it coming, so much that it can't be ignored, then the second line of defense is to try to find some way of reconciling the new information with the firmly held convictions. It looks to me like this is where Forbes and Scott Mendelson are right now. The firmly held beliefs and convictions in this case are the ones that make up the ideo-political messaging that informed every single creative decision in The Last Jedi. They could ignore the backlash against The Last Jedi, and by extension the political ideology it represents, when those blamed for being behind the backlash could be dismissed as toxic fans, man-babies, and alt-right Trump supporters. But when more and more within the industry itself are saying, however respectfully and carefully, pretty much exactly the same thing as the fans they've spent years gaslighting and misrepresenting, then it can no longer be ignored. Then it is time for the second line of defense, which is to try to reconcile the new information with the firmly held convictions in a manner which doesn't challenge them. That requires mental leaps and selective omissions, and that is where we are right now. That is what this article is doing. So it is emphasized that Rian Johnson and Lucasfilm did everything by the book, and they made a great and universally beloved movie. However, it turned out that the pleb actually liked Luke Skywalker, and some people out there have some teeny-weeny grievances with the movie because of that. But no one could have foreseen that coming, so that's no one's fault. Not Rian Johnson's, not Kathleen Kennedy's, and especially not the ideo-political messaging they put into the movie. Just to make sure no one thinks Forbes would even suggest anything along those lines, Mendelson provides a pathetic excuse for why Solo might have underperformed, all while suggesting that they should have made a Leia prequel instead. See, gotta protect those firmly held beliefs and convictions. But he stops short of looking into the failure of Galaxy's Edge in the Disney parks and the collapse of merchandising sales. Because there is no way to explain away that without massively increasing the very cognitive dissonance that this article is trying to reduce. Cognitive dissonance will do that, prevent an honest and detailed analysis. Because such an analysis might ultimately lead to the firmly held beliefs and convictions being proven irretrievably wrong. At which point anyone still sane would be forced to discard those beliefs and convictions. And since such firmly held beliefs and convictions usually revolve around religion or ideopolitical worldview, which amounts to pretty much the same thing, that is a very painful process. And the backlash against those who go too far in provoking or expediting it will be fierce. This is the very process that makes people leave their religion or political party or other organization they might have been affiliated with their whole lives. That is difficult enough for a lone individual, but it becomes much more difficult when you are in an echo chamber, a prison of belief where there are gatekeepers ready to strike down at free thinkers. And in some sense, Hollywood today is like that. That's why Mendelson is tiptoeing around the issue here. This article isn't for us, it's written for the incumbents in the industry who are also suffering with the same cognitive dissonance. Hollywood is very much so an echo chamber, and everyone there is expected to cater to the party line. Failure to do so can have dramatic consequences, and anyone expressing any kind of sympathy for any viewpoint associated with the conservative side of the political aisle, lest they are already powerful and influential, will see their career ended. I'm not joking. In the 2016 election, actor Antonio Sabato Jr. voiced his support of Donald Trump. For this, he was instantly blacklisted, and every single one of his representatives, from agent to manager to commercial agent, dropped him like a hot potato. He wasn't an A-lister with more money than he could spend in a lifetime, but a working actor who was suddenly shunned out of the industry. As a result, he had to leave LA altogether and take a job in construction no less, in order to support his family. No one felt bad about destroying his livelihood and ability to support his children. Quite the contrary, this is what many wanted to see more of. Last fall, there was a conservative fundraising event in Beverly Hills, and Will and Grace stars Deborah Messing and Eric McCormack demanded the list of attendees be made public. Specifically, so any closeted Trump supporter in the industry could be outed and blacklisted. They got some limited backlash for this, but no real consequences, because their view on this matter is a commonly held one. That is a recipe for creating an echo chamber in which one drives each other more and more extreme. That's a vicious circle it is very difficult to escape from, and so many hide their true opinions for fear of being blacklisted. They end up self-censoring themselves, because even stating facts that challenge the ruling ideopolitical paradigm comes with a great personal risk. Again, that's why Mendelson is tiptoeing around this issue. That's why 2 years later, we get an article merely suggesting there is a message to be learned here. Not a deep message, just that despite the conventional Hollywood wisdom saying otherwise, audiences liked Luke Skywalker. So maybe it's okay for Superman to be the Boy Scout he always was too, next time that question pops up. That's actually a fair point regarding Superman. Warner always wanted him to be more like Batman, and we saw that in Man of Steel. And they originally wanted the Justice League to consist of Batman, Flying Batman, Woman Batman, Water Batman, and Running Real Fast Batman. So this is actually a good point to end the article on. This article is very careful about it, but it is actually calling for change. Not radical change, not ditching the firmly held convictions, but suggesting that audiences may be open to Luke Skywalker-like characters in addition to Han Solo-like characters. However, whether Forbes intends to or not, even that is putting the foot in the door and adding to the mounting evidence that the ideopolitical paradigm Hollywood right now is sadly afflicted with has to go. There are indications that change is happening, but it won't happen overnight. However frustrating a read it may be for us, this is actually an article that should be shared widely and celebrated. Forbes used to be in denial about the backlash, but now it's acknowledged in a way it never was before, and without the fans being attacked for it. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments.